Today, we become legends.
Smite's items are an extremely important part of the game, arguably even more important than the gods themselves, given you buy from the same pool of items no matter what god you are or what game mode you're in. Well, with a handful of exceptions of course. Anyway, over the years Smite has had some superstar items that just feel so good to use. This video will be covering my top 10 plus a couple of honorable mentions that didn't quite make the list. Also, just to be clear, these are 10 items I personally like to use, not necessarily good items or the same items you love. But do leave your personal favourites down below. Hey, just a quick mention that I'm doing a birthday stream over on Twitch right now as this video is going live, so if you want to see me play some games, maybe with these items, then hop on over to twitch.tv/intersectyt to say hi. But back to the video. With that said, let's jump in with number 10. So first up, taking 10th place on the list is HYDRA'S LAMENT, a true classic Smite item that has been around seemingly forever. It was in the game when I started in 2014, albeit with a definitely different sprite, and probably has been in the game for a while before that. The reason HYDRA'S makes this list though is because it encourages and gives payoff to AA cancelling, which I think is a really cool and skill expressive tech within the game. This item celebrates that, and over the years the item has gotten surprisingly good base stats, so it always feels good to pick this up on any of your AA cancelling assassins like Thor or Susanna. Next up at number 9 is actually a pair of items, LONO'S mask and RANGDA'S mask. These two are extremely similar in how they work, so I decided to bundle them together despite their gargantuan meta relevance gap. LONO'S is my personal favourite of the two, perhaps partially because you can actually use it in Conquest and not auto-lose. Sorry RANGDA'S fans, I do love the item, but it really is asking to lose MMR. The unique playstyle that both these masks offer is super interesting though, as it completely changes your build and playstyle when picked up. Very interesting items that I thought must make the top 10 somewhere, though I do have quite a few I like more overall. And two of those few are taking the number 8 spot in another double placement. The duo in question, Original Doomorb and Original Heartseeker. So this is the first entry with items that are no longer in Smite, so a quick explainer for how these two worked. Each stacked 50 times from minion last hits and provided an absolute shit ton of their respective powers given their cheap cost as tier 2 items that only ran you back about 1800 to 2000 gold. The catch? Well, every time you died with these items you lost half your stack count. Yeah, extremely punishing since a massive portion of Doomorb and Heartseeker's power back then was from these stacks. This made for a super interesting risk-reward play, albeit sometimes a bit broken, which is why these two are slightly lower on the list. The items were absurdly statted for the cost when fully stacked, but will get you way more attention from the enemy jungler looking to take half your stacks away. It was cool to play with and even cool to play against, as any kill on their ADC and Heartseeker meta was extra spicy because they lost 25 power on top of their life. Moving on to item number 7 though, I've got Bluestone Pendant. In all its iterations to be honest, as an OG starter item, a new starter item, and both its upgrades. As someone who was around before this item was added, I can tell you that ability-based solo laners and hunters always felt sort of weird, since the starter items that existed back then didn't really fit them too well. AA solo laners and ADCs had Death's Toll, but ability users kind of had nothing, except maybe Mark of the Vanguard. When Bluestone was added in Season 2, it made so many gods feel so much better to play in the early game. The revamped Season 8 starter is of course just as satisfying, and both upgrades are great. A better version of the base item I already love, or one that grants attack speed and percent procs but sacrifices damage. Very cool, super glad to see this item become a thing, and even more glad we're still not in the blessing days when Bluestone didn't exist. Which, by the way, if you're wondering why Crusher and Bluestone are basically the same thing, that's because Crusher was added when Bluestone was removed in the Blessings update in Season 5. By the time they re-added starter items in Season 8, Crusher was such an established staple favourite that they never removed it. Hiding in the number 6 spot is an item I've also seen a lot of you guys say you miss as well. Yep, it's Hide of the Urchin. This item was another classic that saw the days of Release Guan, the Dirty Bubble build, Season 2 tank meta, and many more pass it by. I'm sure a lot of you watching probably know this item as it was only removed at the start of this year, but it was essentially a mixed defense stacking item with some of the best overall defensive stats in the entire game, at the cost of needing up to 10 kills or assists to fully stack. The exact number changed around a bit during its life cycle. It also got a new passive added over the years that stacked up a health shield over time like a personal Khepri shield, which was a welcome addition to an old item. Hide just always felt so cozy to have in your build. Defense of both kinds and lots of health is always super valuable in one item, as we now see with the Druidstone tree, Manticore spikes, and some others. Sad this item got removed really. I think with some glyphs it could have been pretty nutty, but its replacement is also a crazy cool item. No spoilers. Breaking into my top 5 Smite items in history though, we have PRIDWEN. So this item is an example of glyphs done brilliantly in my opinion. Before it got glyphs this season, PRIDWEN was just a pretty cool but nothing too crazy item. A nice idea to have it interact with ultimates and scale the shield off of your prots was cool for build synergies as well, but the added glyphs take this item from great to god tier in my opinion. This glyph selection is a clear choice to make, more damage or more tankiness. This is great for glyphs as it means there are genuinely situations where you might want either one, provided they're balanced properly of course. Perhaps it's recency bias with PRIDWEN being so strong this season, but this item just feels so cozy to have in a tank build. So by now you're probably thinking to yourself, this guy's just a filthy tank main that only likes tank items or squishy items that lose half of their stacks when an OP tank comes and murders them. And okay, you're kind of right, but next up at number 4 I have to throw some respect on QIN'S. Another long-time staple of Smite that has been around as long as I can remember, alongside its arch rival of course, the crit builds. That dynamic of bursty crit which is better against squishies or sustained DPS QIN'S which is better against tanks is and always has been the dynamic of all time in ADC builds. Now, I have to say here that the line has been blurred a little bit in modern Smite. Back in the day before every item got premium stats, it was generally considered really bad, borderline trolling to build crit and QIN'S in the same build. You would simply be sacrificing too much to do so, given crit used to be less plentiful and it took 3 items to get even decent crit chance. For a while, 100% crit chance wasn't even attainable with the current items that existed, and given you also need a lifesteal item, at least 1% pen item, ideally 2 for QIN'S damage to really rack up on those tanks, some good attack speed to actually make the QIN'S work effectively, there was just too much to fit into 6 item slots that you couldn't feasibly go crit and QIN'S without sacrificing majorly in some other areas. Nowadays, items randomly have 10% pen and 15% attack speed just slapped on, plus the average crit chance on an item is way higher than it used to be, so it's actually doable. But moving on from that massive detour about the history of hunter builds, QIN'S is a classic Smite item that I think provides a really interesting trade-off with crit, as it shreds tanks much more effectively, but crit blows up squishies much more effectively. Very cool dynamic, and QIN'S is way cooler than crit, don't at me. Moving on though, we've reached my top 3 favourite Smite items of all time, and first up at the number 3 spot I have Prophetic Cloak. Yeah, as probably almost all of you guessed, that Hide of the Urchin replacement I talked about earlier is of course Prophetic, the new cloak tree item added in year 10. And as much as I love Urchin, I have to say Prophetic is a bit cooler and more interesting. The whole minigame of supports and sometimes solos just running up and bonking people for Prophetic stacks and hunting down the enemy mid laners to get the final magical stack they need to evolve it is just so cool. And while it can take a long time to complete, the payoff is more than worth it as you get hands down the best single defense item in the entire game. In contention for best item in general, to be honest. 60 of each prots is just insane, more than Hide of the Urchin ever had, plus some of it is auras for your backline, 100 health extra to be even more tanky, 10% cooldown, and of course, the main star of the show, the 15% mitigations, or 7.5% if you can't quite meet that top requirement. Having this item honestly just makes me feel so safe as a tank. When it's cold and rainy outside, Prophetic Cloak is there to keep me safe from the chill and the hunter players with QIN'S at my doorstep. Okay, moving on from my love letter to Prophetic Cloak, onto my number 2 favourite item in Smite history, which is Soul Eater. Specifically the current version of Soul Eater. Season 3 Soul Eater can suck a fat one in my opinion, anyone who played back then and wasn't an ADC main will concur. Current Soul Eater though is damn close to a perfect item in terms of design and fun factor. Is it always on top of the meta? No, but is it always super cozy to have in your build? Absolutely. I mainly love this item for its solo lane applications, giving some ability-based warriors or assassins without innate sustain the potential to match the many solo gods that do have it in their kit. It's sort of a great equalizer in that sense, and I can't imagine playing gods like Wukong, Pele, Kleena, or Mulan without it. Of course they do work without it, but it's just so nice to have on a certain few gods. Does everyone build this item? Absolutely not, but I think it's carved out an excellent niche over the years and is one of my favourite items for that reason. It has a super specific and sort of game-changing purpose, and it fills that spot in the item meta super well. Alright, we've made it to the number 1 spot, but before I reveal what many of you longtime viewers probably already know is my number 1 pick, a few honourable mentions. Golden Blade for many of the same reasons Soul Eater is on here. It fills a very specific niche and makes a certain subsection of gods viable almost on its own. Very cool item that isn't super popular overall, but fills a specific purpose very well. Also, all the rat acorns, and I mean all of them. His original 4 and the new 4. Not his in-between only one choice acorn though, that was boring. I could spend an entire video talking about these acorns, but they also have different playstyles like ability-based damage, crit, item effects and mobility from Opal, strong CC from Topaz, healing and tank-based options from Emerald, Thickback and Evergreen. It means you never really know what sort of rat you're facing, and playing him 2 games in a row can result in a completely different playstyle and build. Insanely cool, but it didn't make the actual list since they're not generalistic tier 3 items. And finally, I would be remiss not to mention Gauntlet of Thebes as the staple supports get behind, so they get this broken stats for the cost item. Always feels nice to build and even has some solo lane applications too. Oh, also, and the very old Thebes that increased your max HP by 15% while having 600 base HP on the item was hilarious, and was actually the fastest item that ever got removed for being OP, lasting under 24 hours. But with that said, let's move on to my most favoritist item of them all. Drumroll please! It's Glad Shield, yeah, old Glad Shield of course. Leave your filthy Arthur abuser skill issue comments down below because I'm about to gush for this glorious item and perhaps even complete a dark ritual to pray for its return. This item is basically Soul Eater, but built specifically for warriors as the healing is percent HP based, not lifesteal based, so you don't need to do much damage per ability to still heal a lot. Just in case some of you watching don't know about the old version of this item, it was a tier 2, no tier 3 variant that only cost 1700 gold to fully complete, and every ability hit healed you for 2.5% max health and mana. It came online insanely quickly as a rush due to being tier 2 only, so you could pretty much rely on having it for the vast majority of the laning phase. Of course, it was most abused by King Arthur with his 8 abilities, but also by Cuchulainn, Tyr, and was even picked up on non-stand switches occasionally like Osiris or Bellona. The brief meta where these two would build both Old Glad Shield and Old Berserker Shield, which was the same thing but for basic attacks, and just heal their entire health bar was pretty insane. To be honest, even the new Glad Shield I think would still make this list, as it's a really nice payoff item for rapid ability usage warriors, but the original version will always hold a special place in my heart as my favourite Smite item of all time. Bring it back as a Glad Shield glyph, that's all I ask for. But that's all I've got for my top 10 favourite Smite items of all time. What are your personal favourite items, or even your top 5 or 10 if you've got the time? Let me know down below with the reason why, I'll be reading them all. Catch you guys in another one later on. Have a great day, and peace out you nerds.